there, dear readers, and welcome to A Chapter a Day. My name is Christine E. Schulze. I'm an author of young adult fantasy, as well as a few kids' books that focus on special needs, and I'm here to welcome you to my new channel. The purpose of this channel is to introduce readers like yourself to new books by reading a sample chapter from them. So hopefully, each and every day, I will be reading a chapter from a book, and that will help introduce you to some new books, see if there may be a book that you'd be interested in reading. And maybe it's a favorite book that you've already read, but sometimes it's nice to just hear someone read part of it out loud. So that's what we're here for. I'm happy that you're joining me on this new journey. And with me being a young adult author, probably a lot of the books I will be reading from will be young adult fantasy, other types of fantasy, but I'm completely open to trying other genres of books. But for right now, we're going to get started off with reading a chapter from one of my books, Prelude of Fire, which is a young adult fantasy. Now, we won't be reading just from my books. We'll be reading from lots of different authors as well. But since I have my fiery red hair today, I just dyed it a couple days ago, and my trusty elf ears, and my son, which does factor into the book, and Ashley, the main character, her magic. I figure I may as well read a chapter from this first to start us off. Also, my purple glasses. I don't know if you guys can see. I don't have purple eyes like Ashley, but that's because I can't even put eye drops in my eyes, let alone a piece of, contacts, right? So, yeah, we're gonna get started. And strap on your elf ears, get ready to listen to Chapter 1 from Prelude of Fire. Actually, you know what? First, I think the best thing to do is to read the blurb to you guys on the back cover, and just so you guys can get a feel for what the book is about. And the blurb says, Ashley is a fire who can harness powers of flame from the sun. Despite her powers, or perhaps because of them, she has always felt like an outsider among the forest-footer elves who raised her and her brother Mira. When their home is attacked by King Ragnar and his seer, a vicious drought that burns all in its path, Ashley embarks on a quest to save it. Her only clues are the strange music playing inside her head, the warnings of a captive princess, and a broken prism left to her by her long-lost mother. With the help of new friends, including a snarky elf, 2 squabbling but kind-spirited bards, and a boy who can turn into a tree, Ashley journeys to collect the remaining prism shards. Can she find them and defeat Ragnar before his seer consumes all Hyloria? Or will the secrets of the prism cause Ashley to lose her new friends, her family, and even herself? Prelude of Fire is an epic quartet that combines... Prelude of Fire is the first... This is my own series, I should know what I'm doing here. Prelude of Fire is the first in an epic quartet that combines music and magic while reminding us that our choices, not our circumstances, define who we truly are and will become. So I like to think of this series as, kind of a Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones style book, except young adult, so not all the sex and whatnot that you would see in the Game of Thrones series, but it has some more serious elements to it, but a lot of the magic is music-based, and you don't see that quite as much in the first book, but you definitely will moving forward into the other books for sure. This didn't start out as a series. It was just going to be a single book, but then, if you're an author, you know how that goes. Sometimes you just have to explore and expand it into a whole series. So as you can see, Mr. Fluffy Cheeks here has joined us. He'll be joining us for the reading. And actually, you know what? Instead of reading Chapter 1, I think the most logical thing to do is to start at the beginning of the book. This book actually does have a prologue, or as you can see here, it's called a prelude, since again, much of the series has to do with musical magic. And it's called The Boy in the Tree, and we are going to read The Boy in the Tree to give you guys a sample of Prelude of Fire. Ashley Jardis awoke. The young teen sat up, blinking in the bright sunlight. The southern wood had been plagued overnight by a searing heat, uncommon for early autumn, and a sticky sweat still clung to her skin. But at least the thick veil of dust and ash no longer tainted the sky. A cool breeze stirred at last, and she inhaled deeply, relishing the clear air and letting it wrap around her faintly burning lungs like a balm. At first, she could only sit gulping the cool air, dazed and unsure where she was or what had happened. But then she felt something metallic and warm at her side. Her new sword. She reached for it, but no sooner did her flesh touch the hilt than a sharp pain burned her palm, and she snatched back her hand with a cry. As she turned her hand over, a shaft of sunlight illuminated the jagged, triangular shape burned into her flesh. Its original brilliant blaze had been reduced now to a pale glow, and the wound had already begun to scar. Pushing through the pain, she clutched the hilt of her sword once more, but this time, along with the sting, a shrill note like a flute shrieking at an impossible decibel tore through her mind, making her wince and curse beneath her breath. Everything rushed back to her, the prism, and the princess, and the golden-cloaked riders carrying the fury of lightning and fire as they soared upon their giant-winged panthers, burning and killing all in their path. The note faded, and then ceased, its torturing trilling altogether. Along with the memories the awful sound had invoked, Ashley's somber spirit returned. But she didn't cry. Her tears were long spent. She must focus on fulfilling Princess Liliana's command, to find the Sprite Woods and the person there who would help her. Ashley caught her reflection in the sword's smooth golden surface. Her shoulder-length, fiery red hair was disheveled and streaked with ash, and her purple tunic was torn and charred with smoke. Wiping her hand across her brow, she wished she had a change of clothes. After everything that had just happened, cleanliness was the least of her concerns, but she would give anything to at least slip into something cooler. A thick sweat began to form on her skin, and the breeze wouldn't help for long. Behind her, the sun glared hot and high in the sky. She glanced up and then did a double take. It was already past noon. "How long have I been asleep?" she muttered, rubbing at her throat. It still ached dully from all the smoke and dust. "Since you passed out yesterday," a young man's voice answered. Startled, Ashley staggered to her feet, grabbed her sword, and spun all about, but she could see nothing except the thick trees of the surrounding wood. She hoped the heat hadn't made her delirious. Surely the voice had sounded too near and real to be a mere trick of the mind. "Where are you?" she demanded. A sting of anger empowered her, returning strength to her weary body. She clutched the sword hard, already feeling its innate flame merging with the fire magic filling her body. "Show yourself," she said, a little more forcefully. "I'm right behind you." Ashley whirled, seeking the stranger in vain. "I still can't see you." The invisible whoever it was released an agitated sigh. "Of course you can see me, unless you're blind, which you obviously aren't, since you keep staring right at me." "Oh," he chuckled. "Sorry, I was up pretty late guarding you, so I guess I forgot that I'm in my other form, which might not be the best, now I think of it. I'm rather susceptible to fire, and you seem sort of in a foul mood, and you are aware that you're holding a fire blade?" Ashley swung her sword, and a wide arc of golden red flame blazed from its tip. Euphoria flitted inside her as she released her pent-up anger and pain at this invisible friend or foe. As he shouted in alarm, Ashley only half paid attention, spinning to release another ring of fire. "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" he cried. Ashley paused, still clutching the blade, and lowered the flames, smirking at the sudden fight in his voice. Breathing hard, she stood poised, ready for another go. "Hey now," the voice said, "you nearly burned my arms to cinders." "Maybe if I could see your arms, that wouldn't be an issue." Ashley glared warningly in the voice's direction and pointed her sword right at the trees. "Now listen up. I'm in no mood for these silly games. Show yourself, or I'll burn more than just your arm. Whoa, watch out!" Even as the invisible person shouted this warning, Ashley spotted something from the corner of her eye, something bright and whizzing straight toward her. She flung herself to the ground just as it zoomed past her head, so close that it ruffled her hair. As it whacked into one of the nearby trees, Ashley glanced up in alarm. An arrow emitting smoke, a sign of the flame burning on its tip only moments ago. How easily it could have speared her head, had she moved the wrong way. Something roughly grabbed Ashley's arm, and she yelped, then stared in alarm to see a tree branch closing its small, thin limbs around her arm. The next moment, the branch morphed into a green hand and arm, and suddenly, a tall, lanky, green-skinned boy stood before her instead of a tree. Several more arrows whizzed past, narrowly missing them both. The green stranger's gaze narrowed in annoyance, and he yanked Ashley up, dragging her into the woods on a mad dash. "Damn it," he snapped. "What were you lying around for?" Ashley's legs wobbled, and her entire body ached as she stumbled in her attempt to match his swift pace. "Stop daydreaming and pick it up. We gotta fly out of here before they burn us both to ashes. Trust me, they're more skilled with those arrows than you are with your sword." All Ashley could do was sheathe her sword. She didn't wish to spare either of them if she fell, Despite how annoying this green stranger was, he did seem intent on saving her life. She panted for breath as he dragged her along. His legs were long, his strides broad and high, yet effortless, almost like a deer springing across the earth. Even more astounding was the fact that he seemed to constantly adjust shades of green to blend almost perfectly with the forest blurring past. If not for his tight grip on her hand, she would have sworn that he sometimes vanished altogether. The young man jabbered on, his voice as fluid as though he was merely taking a stroll instead of fleeing for his life. First rule of making grand escapes: don't stand around and let people shoot arrows at your head, especially when your hair is a brighter shade of red than the fire they're throwing at you. Kinda makes you a perfect target. They emerged into a large clearing. Last I checked, leading someone into a wide open space like this," Ashlai gasped for another breath, "also makes them perfect targets. How can I be so sure you're not on their side?" The next instant, the green boy whistled, something huge and green swooped from above, and Ashley's scream was choked into silence as the creature snatched them up and rose abruptly higher and higher into the sky. "And the second rule," the young man said smugly, "is to always have a trusty steed at hand." When Ashlai regained enough composure to survey what was happening, she saw that they rode astride a giant bat-like creature. Its soft, thick fur was many different shades of green, matching its master's skin and hair perfectly. Ashlai imagined the bat and boy merging together to form a two-headed creature named Bizarre in sarcasm. As they ascended on large, leathery wings, Ashlai hugged her legs tight around the beast's body and clutched its thick tufts of fur with an iron grasp, all the while staring straight ahead between its massive, fox-like ears, not daring to look down or even move. From the corner of her eye, she glimpsed a defiant smirk on her rescuer's lips. And just what is so amusing?" The boy had turned around to face her and now glanced her up and down. "Nothing. I just didn't expect... you." With a wry snort, he looked ahead once more. "You didn't expect me to what?" Ashlai leaned toward him, but then she swayed uneasily and quickly resumed her position, focusing her gaze on one of the bat's ears to steady herself. "Here." As Ashlai stared as the boy extended his arm, which suddenly turned into a branch again. Her fear of being only Amiel knew how high in the air was momentarily forgotten as he plucked some of his leaves and held them toward her. "It's not poison," he said with a roll of his eyes. "They have healing properties. Might help with your nerves. Any queasiness." Ashlai hesitated, but then her stomach churned, and she was instantly keen on having anything inside her belly. She chewed the leaves slowly, wrinkling her nose as their pungent juices bit at her tongue and throat. Despite their unpleasant sharpness, a coolness also released in her mouth, providing some comfort and settling her stomach a bit. "Thanks, that does help," she admitted. "Of course," the boy huffed, turning his branch into an arm once more. "I mean, it's really lucky that I found you when I did, you know? That I stayed up to guard you all night?" "You fell asleep," Ashlai said flatly. "And if you hadn't, you might have noticed danger sooner. We might have gotten out of there without being attacked at all." The young man's face drew into a defeated grimace. "You're safe now, aren't you? That's all that matters. And this is nice, isn't it?" He threw his arms wide, embracing the wind as it rushed over him. Ashlai watched him skeptically. The only nice thing about this experience is the constant breeze. Though even the breeze only exists because we're moving at a terrifying speed at a terrifying height. Whatever. It's all right. First flights are scary for everyone. Besides, I'm used to this attitude. People like you are always ungrateful anyway. What is that supposed to mean?" The young man shrugged and glanced at her sword before looking suddenly blasé. "People born into good families. People who never have to worry about food or clothes or money or war. People who have everything they need. Is that what you think?" Ashlai growled, her voice wavering. She wiped away a few sudden angry tears. "You don't even know me. You think my life is so perfect? After I watched my entire village razed to the ground just yesterday? Why did you even rescue me if only to tell me how inadequate I am? I'm obviously unworthy of your almighty services." For a moment, dead silence passed between them. Only the shrill wind whistled in Ashlai's ears, reminding her again of the high-pitched music note and making it reverberate faintly in her memory. She breathed deeply, fighting tears hard. She had already told herself no more tears, and certainly wouldn't waste them on this idiot's satisfaction. Quietly, the boy said, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize. Sometimes I just blurt things out. Yeah, well, maybe you really need to think before you open your mouth." Yeah, maybe I do." Ashlai took another deep breath. Her anger melted, ever so slightly, as she saw the sincere embarrassment on his face. "Here, have some water." He reached for a flask strapped around his waist and handed it to her. Ashlai nodded gratefully before chugging the water. The liquid rushed over her achy throat with a soothing coolness, washing some of the pain away. "Thanks," Ashlai said, capping it and handing it back to him. "No problem. Anyway, I guess we ought to get acquainted if we're going to be traveling together for a while. My name's Aryl. Aryl of the Tree Sprites." "Ashlai, of the Forest Footers." It was Aryl's turn to look genuinely surprised. "You're really the Ashlai? The one Old Man Eldwin told me about?" Ashlai wrinkled her nose. Who in all the world is Old Man Eldwin? Aryl shook his head. "Never mind. Long story. Just, it's a pleasure to meet you. Really." "You too," Ashlai said, though she wasn't quite sure yet. At least he was making an attempt to drop his constant sarcasm. Aryl studied her carefully. "Aren't you a fire, though? You're definitely not a forest footer, especially with those purple eyes." "Yeah, but I grew up with the elves. I've never even seen another fire besides my brother, not until recently." She let her voice trail, uncertain how much was safe to tell him. Still watching her closely, Aryl said, "I probably should have already done this, but maybe this will help you feel better about everything." Aryl held out his hand. A jagged triangular scar gleamed ever so faintly on his palm. The mark looked identical to hers, only a bit older, she guessed, from the state of its healing. "Wait," Ashlai said, as another memory dawned on her. "You said you're from the Sprite Woods? And you've been waiting for me, right? Because some elder sent you?" Aryl arched a brow. "And you're getting at?" "Liliana told me to meet someone in the Sprite Woods, someone who had a mark like mine. I guess she meant you." Aryl grinned and lowered his hand. "You're right. This mark, Eldwin's story, it's why I came and stood guard over you. I found you, saw you had a similar mark, and figured you were the one I was looking for. Besides, it's not like we get a ton of fires in my neck of the woods." "Did you hear it too, then?" Ashlai asked. "When your mark burned, did you hear it?" "That terrible shrieking like someone playing a song to wake the dead? Yeah, I definitely heard it, and sometimes I still do. There have been a lot of other strange things going on in the woods the past couple of days, and I was told I'm not the only one to be expecting these marks, or being sent on a wild goose chase for prism shards." "Does that mean you already have one too? A shard?" Ashlai asked. He shook his head. "I do not." "Then why would your mark have burned? And why did you hear the music note?" "I'm not sure." Aryl watched her with a deep curiosity, and she watched him back. He looked about her age, maybe a couple of years older, a strange mix between gangly and muscled. Away from the forest, his skin shimmered a fair leaf green, his hair a darker shade. He wore a simple dark green tunic with brown pants, and his feet were bare. He suddenly smiled in amusement and winked at her, and she turned her attention back to the bat's ear. This was the last thing she needed right now, for Forest Boy to think she was falling for him when there were far more serious matters to deal with at hand. "So what's your story?" Aryl asked. "I mean, Master Eldwin sure made it sound like you're a big deal." "I don't know why," she said. "How long have you even been looking for me? Your mark looks older than mine." Aryl folded his arms, defiant as ever. "Hey, you tell your tale, I'll tell mine. That's the deal." Ashlai's demeanor grew stormy as the happenings of the past 3 days flashed through her mind like a recurring nightmare. She pressed her lips into a thin line, remaining pointedly silent. "Hey, I'm sorry," Aryl said. "If you really don't want to talk about it, it's okay." "No, it's all right," she said quietly, before hesitating again. She needed to talk, if she could find the strength. Aryl watched her with sincere curiosity. If nothing else, perhaps his calm spirit about everything that had just happened meant he would be less likely to judge or overreact if she told her story. Somehow, she found his obnoxious presence comforting. Perhaps he was just the person she needed to confide in at the moment. The way he had protected her so fervently reminded her of Merit. The thought stabbed her heart anew, but it also reminded her of the urgency of her mission. If Aryl was going to help her, he needed to know what Liliana had shared with her and everything that had happened afterward. Taking a deep breath, she began her tale. And that concludes the prelude. So, in order to find out what happens next, you're going to have to read the book for yourself. What's going on with these prism shards that they're collecting? How did Ashlai's home get destroyed? We know from reading the blurb that there's like a crazy king named Ragnar on the loose with his seer, which is these crazy fires and drought that is just consuming everything. So what's going on with that? What happened to Ashlai and her family? Why does she live with the Forest Footer elves when she's a fire? And how is Ashlai and Aryl's quest gonna go? How are they gonna be able to, ultimately defeat, hopefully, this Dark King and restore peace to the land, because that is the objective. Again, to find out, you can read Prelude of Fire for yourself. It is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, Barnes & Noble's website. I will go ahead and leave those links below in the comments. I might leave some other links for you guys as well, including a link to my newsletter. When you sign up for my email newsletter, you also get a free ebook copy of another of my books called The Chronicles of the Mira. Feel free to comment on what you think of this first video. Feel free to comment and give me ideas of books that you would love me to read a chapter from, so that I can share it with other folks, and maybe someone else can discover a new book that they love by listening to a chapter from a book that you recommend. On that note, thank you so much for listening, and happy reading. I hope that you're all inspired by whatever you go on to read, and I will see you in my next video.